This podcast is part of the Pull Up a Chair podcast network. Let's build community through connection, conversation, and collaboration. This podcast is sponsored by Lever Consulting, editing with a purpose. Check them out at leverconsulting.com for a free consultation.
Hey, I'm Ryan.
And I'm V.
And you're listening to Cringe With Me, the podcast where we dig up the cringiest articles, questions, and tidbits of human culture to review with you, our listeners, so you too can cringe with me.
I'm hypocritical, but at least I know we could be beautiful or maybe terrible.
Alright guys, I have a really good one. So I jumped onto Reddit and I took a page right out of Ryan's playbook and I have an Am I the Asshole post.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Yes. The post is by r/I'm not deleted yet. That's their name. The title of this post is, Am I the asshole for giving my son a name that sounds similar to my friend's dead child name?
Oh, okay. This is... the first half of the title, I was like, didn't we do this one? Because wasn't there one where it was the Am I the Asshole for naming my kid after, like, my grandfather or something? Yeah, I feel like we had another naming one.
Yes.
Oh my god, naming the kid after your friend's dead child is... okay. We need context.
We haven't even gotten to the post yet, and you're freaking out. I love it.
That title's a lot.
My childhood best friend had a traumatic stillbirth 2 years ago. It was a shock to all of us, and we sincerely mourned for him.
Mm-hmm.
They gave him a name, they had a funeral, they buried him. After months of grieving and giving them space to mourn, we started spending more time together again, and our friendship got a lot closer, deeper, and more intimate.
Okay.
Eventually, they seemed to accept the loss and start to move on with their life. At this point, everything concerning our friendship was on good terms. A couple of months ago, my first son was born, and we gave him a name that sounds similar to my friend's dead son. I'm not going to write the real names here, but let's just say it's as similar as Michael is to Mike.
Okay.
With Michael being the name of our son in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, my wife and I had discussed the similarities, but we came to the conclusion that it's different enough that our friend shouldn't have a problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
We clearly misjudged the situation.
Okay.
On our first call after the birth, there was the excited question of what was the name. We told them. There was a long pause. Then there was the question of how we came up with that name. I understood the intention of the question, but I decided to ignore it, and I didn't want to connect our happiness with their tragedy in the same sentence.
Mm-hmm.
They congratulated us anyways, but clearly there was a shakiness in my friend's voice on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Days went by, and I messaged them. I invited them to visit our new family, but there was no response for a few days. I called him, but he didn't pick up the phone, and he never called me back. Weeks have gone by, and nothing. Suddenly, I received a message explaining how disappointed they were that our choice of name, and that we didn't even take their feelings into consideration. I explained that it was not our intention to hurt their feelings, and that I intended for it to be disconnected. I had discussed the topic with my wife, and we came to a totally different conclusion than the conclusion they came to. And I'm sorry that I had misjudged the situation. This was a few months ago, and I haven't heard anything back. In fact, they haven't talked to us at all since then. There's been no contact with our other friends even. It's like they've completely isolated themselves from our community. I've tried to reach out a few times in a friendly manner, but there was no response. Am I the asshole for giving my son a name that sounds similar to my friend's dead child's name?
That's a difficult one. My first instinct is that they're not the asshole, but that the situation could have been handled better.
I mean, the situation definitely could have been handled better, but I feel like in this particular instance, they are the asshole.
Okay.
Because, okay, so if you go back to the post, OP explicitly said that he didn't want to connect the two names in the same sentence, but it was very clear from the writing that that's where they heard and liked the idea of the name. It wasn't a family name.
Okay.
It wasn't a name that they liked beforehand. The child had died a long time ago, so it's not like they're unaware of the name or they just found out or anything.
Right.
When they sat down to think about names, that name came up. They liked the name of it. They knew where the name came from.
Okay.
But they didn't want to admit to it.
Got it. Okay.
Also,
that's not what I interpret out of this, but I understand how you think.
that's how I interpret it. But also, they aren't similar names. Mike is a nickname for Michael.
Right.
That kid is still going to be called Mike by people his whole life.
That's why I'm like, I really need to know what the actual name is to make a judgment. Right? Like, because if it's like Ryan and Brian, those are different names.
Yeah, no, that
sounds similar.
That'd be a totally different situation. And a lot of people in the comment section also agree with you. It's like, hey, we can't really give a solid judgment until we hear the actual names, because with Mike and Michael, those two names in particular, that's the same name.
Yeah, it's the same name. It's just a nickname or a shortened version.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's because I don't know that there's very few people named Mike, right? They're named Michael, they go by Mike.
Yes.
You know? The other thing that's a factor to this to me is like, you're saying these people were your close friends, you had an intimate relationship with them. How did you not discuss what you're naming your child before it was born? Like, most people talk about that, right? Like, that seems weird to me. Like, when people find out that you're pregnant, one of the first things they have to have you decided on a name.
Yeah.
So
I feel like they were sketch about it.
Yeah, like, to me, I'm like, either you somehow didn't decide on the name ahead of time, which feels weird, or you purposely didn't tell them, right? It almost feels like they knew the name they were going to pick and didn't bother to check in. Because if you knew that it was similar, but you're like, oh, it'll be fine, you could have had the discussion with your friends before you settled on that name.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you could have said, hey, you know, we're expecting blah, blah, blah. We really want to name our kid this, but we know it's very similar to the name of your stillborn child. Is that going to be a problem? Like, we don't want this to be this thing, but like, we want to make sure that we talk to you about it. Right? Because that might have been different, and they might have reacted differently because it was brought up before the decision was made, and they felt like they were being considered. Maybe they would have seen it in themselves to get past it.
They also gave the opportunity for OP to give an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't immediately like, hey, F you. Mm-hmm. They were like, hey, why that name?
Right.
They gave OP the opportunity. Because my first thought when they gave the opportunity is like, oh, maybe it could be like a common enough name that it could be a family name, and they chose it for that reason.
Sure.
But the fact that OP ignored it is like, okay, so you clearly are ripping off our dead child's name. Yeah. Because it's a nice name.
Also, the way that the line at the end there about how like, oh, I knew what they meant by the question, but decided to answer it differently. They also don't say how they answered it. And I'm like, to me, that's suspicious that they didn't want to, like, what was the bullshit explanation you came up with? Right? Or was it a bullshit explanation? Because it just, I don't know.
It's very clear that OP got the name from the dead child.
You think so?
Well, because if there was another reason, if there was any other reason, OP would be like, here is my reason. I am not an asshole. Because OPs are always sugarcoating things to make themselves seem better. If they had literally anything else, like, oh, this was the only name we could agree on, this is literally the only male name that we both liked, they would say that. If it's like, oh, this is my uncle's name and we really appreciated him, or this is the only name that sounds good with our last name,
Yeah.
They would definitely like just lay it on thick. Like, this is the reason we chose the name. It's completely unrelated.
Yeah, I agree with you. Reading between the lines, I find it incredibly suspicious that they don't actually give any reason for having picked that name.
Yeah. People don't throw out names willy-nilly.
Yeah. Johnny, it's a pretty big discussion.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Yeah, I have some suspicions about it.
I have all the suspicions, and it's like, the thing I'm like really concerned about is now that the couple who lost their child is now ostracized from their community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, they're gonna need extra support right now, because that is emotional. That kind of pain doesn't just like disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like, although we're not hearing the other friends' opinions, it seems like they're all staying close to OP, but nobody's really checking in on the other couple.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It definitely feels like they knew this could be a problem and decided to just risk it. Right?
Yeah.
It feels like they just took a gamble. And when you gamble with your friends' feelings, you don't get to be upset when they decide their feelings are hurt and they decide to cut contact.
Yeah. God, I really wish that we had the names.
Yeah.
Because if it was something like Jake and Jacob, that's like questionable. If it's something like Nathaniel and Nathan, or Nathaniel and Nate.
Well, again,
that's
Jake is a short...
You know, it is
Jake,
shortened, but
right?
it sounds different enough. Like
but
Mike,
it's the same name.
Mike and Michael is just...
Jake and Jacob is the same as Mike and Michael. They're the same.
It's similar. I think that they sound different enough, but like there's no difference between Mike and Michael.
Well, yeah. I guess what I mean is like Mike is just the short version of Michael, and Jake is the short version of Jacob.
I see.
Right. So like they're direct parallels in this case. I'm saying the only way it could be excusable to me is if it's like they're different names that just sound similar. Like I said, like Brian and Ryan.
Yeah. No. See,
right?
That's totally like there'd be no question there.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that his example was a name and the nickname, and they chose the name, and it's like, okay, if your baby died and you gave them a cutesy like nickname, like that's what you would have called them until they were like an adult.
Yeah.
Like that makes it harder, because you know they're gonna take little, in this case, I guess we'll have to use the given ones. They're going to take Michael home, and literally everybody's going to call him Mike and Mikey while he's growing up.
Yeah, well, and the other aspect of this is that, you know, if your kids name something very similar to their child, or like basically a nickname or shortened version of their name, you're forcing them to be reminded of that every time they spend time with you.
Exactly.
So maybe they're not even upset with you. Maybe it's not about how they feel about you. Maybe it's just they've decided, like, being around this constant reminder of this thing is too emotionally difficult and we don't want to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's also going to erase in the minds of everybody their stillborn baby. Because eventually,
I didn't think about that.
Well, because it's the whole friend group has been brought into this. Because they're going to be all like, hey, Mikey's birthday's coming up. What Mikey are they going to be thinking about?
Right.
Nobody got really attached to that stillborn except for the parents. And yeah, everybody probably, I hate to use the term humored them, but everybody went along with the funeral and the burial. But that's as involved as all of their friends are ever going to be in their child's life. Mm-hmm. They're going to have the name, and that's it. Mm-hmm. That's all that child ever got was a name.
Yeah, I hear you. It's a good point. Yeah, it feels like these people were inconsiderate and just decided not to care.
Yeah, like that makes you an asshole. It's like if that particular name had any other justification, then I'd question it, and depending on the justification, it would make them not the asshole. Mm-hmm. There'd be a question, there'd be a discussion. Mm-hmm. But they did this I don't know if it was malice or not, but they did this ignoring and completely not caring about their friend, which is incredibly effed up.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I have to change my vote. I think they are the asshole. Yeah. My initial impression was they weren't, but the more we've discussed it, the more I'm realizing, yeah, this person is the asshole.
Yeah, like, okay, my first thought was, why? And I kept, like, I reread this post a couple times, like, thinking, why would they think that they're not the asshole? Why is this, like, a question? And I kept, like, if there was any justification, OP would have gave it to us.
Yeah, there's no justification. There's no explanation about why they chose the name.
Like, even if it was something as little as this is the only name that me and my partner like, that's even a justification. Mm-hmm. This is the only name we could agree on. Mm-hmm. This is a family name. Yeah,
those, again, all be fine explanations. You're right. It's not what they wrote, it's what they didn't write.
Exactly.
That's making it feel
it's
like...
the between the lines. And we're getting the sugar-coated version, too.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
That's how it always is. We always get the, I'm the victim.
Yeah, the self-portrayal is always going to be from the best light.
And then the fact that they discussed it together, but they didn't discuss it with a friend. Like, hey... They're not going to be upset with this, right? Ah, totally. They'll be fine with this.
It shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, anytime you're like, this person probably won't care. Well, do you want to ask them if they'll care? Maybe you should ask them if they'll care.
Yeah, maybe. Just a little word to the wise.
Especially if, like they said, they have a close, intimate friendship with these people. It seems like the kind of thing you could talk about with them.
They clearly don't.
Yeah.
But speaking of close, intimate friendships, do you love me yet, Ryan? We spend enough time together.
I mean, you've gone from telling me that I don't like you or want to be here to just asking if I love you, which I feel like is a step in a positive direction.
I mean, that was only a few months ago, right?
Yeah.
That you've been locked in my girl dungeon, unable to leave.
Progress is progress. That's all I'm saying.
Recording videos, Stockholm Syndrome let in yet?
It could be Stockholm Syndrome. It could be.
Okay, good. Then we're making steps in the right direction. All right, guys, we'll see you next week where Ryan maybe will have something more impactful than this post.
Oh, well, we're going to be doing another mother-in-law one per your request.
Yes! Oh my god, I'm so ready for this. Bring it!
Yeah. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
See you next time.
All right. Well, I'm Ryan, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram under Build Right Roll, where I post about my professional Dungeon Master experiences. You can check out the links in the description if you're interested in hiring a professional DM or looking to level up your own DM skills.
And you can find me, V, at Cringe Queen at Instagram and Twitter, or check me out on YouTube as the Queen of Cringe, and be embarrassed with me.
All right. Well, thanks for listening and cringing along with us.
And we'll catch you next time with more awesome cringe content.
I'm hypocritical, but at least I know we could be beautiful or maybe terrible. Only one way to know. Only one way to know.
Hello, I am Patrick.
And I'm Andrew. And I'm Christian.
And I'm Allie.
And we are Rad Theater, a podcast where a bunch of friends play role-playing games and share a single brain cell, and the GM doesn't always have it. Oh, and it's theater spelled the correct way, Theatre.